We are back with another episode on the Magic Minds podcast, and today's episode is with Nicholas Gonzalez. Nicholas, in addition to being an awesome Texan, that's where myself and William, my co-founder in Magic Mind, that's where we're from. But in addition to that factoid, he is a phenomenally successful actor, producer here in LA that has been in not only so many cool shows, but just been involved over the last 2 decades in so many awesome projects that it would blow your mind. He's most famous for Resurrection Boulevard or The Good Doctor, where he's awesome lead in both of those. But he has been in shows, everything from The OC to Pretty Little Liars to Narcos. He is to La Brea, just a mainstay in so many awesome series throughout his career. And yet, some of the topics we talk about, in addition to his love and obsession with things like regenerative farming or health and wellness products and practices, we also get to talk about what he calls a career of rejections within the realm of acting. We talk about that side, the inner side of creating. It's, for me, as an entrepreneur, I just thought as an actor, you make it to a certain level and you're just good. You've made it, as they say. And I should have known better, because as an entrepreneur, every month you're reapplying for the job to get to wow your customers. It's never like, all right, on a certain Tuesday, you've made it and you're done. Every day, every week, every month, every year. It's an ongoing battle to keep serving your customers, people like you. And similarly, in his world, every year you have to reprove yourself, find new projects, and delight audiences with a brand new creation, completely independent of what you might have done 5 years prior, 3 years prior. So it's a really fun conversation with Nicholas on so many fronts like those and so many more. And I'm excited to get into it with you. And 250 divided by 80 is 3.125. So without further delay, let's get into it with Nicholas Gonzalez. This is the Magic Minds podcast. Let's have our shot right now.
This might help. I might have a little bit more information this way.
Yeah, this is going to be...
Salud.
Salud. Salud, Nicholas.
Well, you took that down like a boss.
It was
like one gulp.
Let's just say I'm a veteran in the Magic Mind shot-taking game.
And we're on two different sides of the camera, so if you can't see, he's a large man. He's a tall guy.
Dude, well, and anyone that's only listening to this, please do check out the video version of this podcast episode. Because Nicholas has some guns. And I'm glad you're not afraid to show them off. Because
I didn't know about all this. But
good looking cat. And yeah, actually, I'm glad I didn't tell you there'd be 3 cameras, because I love the tank top. The tank top look with the guns ablaze. You were just saying something about...
So my wife looks up any sort of beauty product or anything that we would put on our skin, on our children's skin, hair, any sort of thing. And you can look it up on a site and it'll tell you where it ranks by, with irritants or toxic chemicals or what's been found to have heavy metals, or, well, you want to stay away from that. This is a good brand. Or if you like this, you'll love that. I wish I could remember the site.
If we don't remember during the episode, for listeners, I'm going to, we'll put it in the show notes, because that'd be really cool to look up.
And you and I were talking a little bit earlier, but, not to harp on it, but we did, we experienced infertility, and the short story was my wife kind of just changed everything about what we put on and in our bodies. We became a lot more focused on that, and the health of our family changed as a result. Not just my kids, because we're talking about it was around COVID, and we were holed up with my in-laws at one point. We were in different places along the way, but at one point we were in Northern California staying with my in-laws, and the changes we made, they made. And they found themselves 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds coming off of medications they'd been on for a few years, just by changing your diet and changing what you're exposed to, what you expose yourself to.
I know you've said in many episodes that, or many podcast interviews around just playing a doctor on TV and sometimes getting mixed up in the real world, especially with a brother and dad in medicine.
It's funny.
Sometimes forgetting that you're not a doctor because you're around it. And to be fair, around it so much with a dad that's a physician growing up with it. But also the amount of research. One interview you're on, it was with doctors and they were like, yeah, you could pass the test.
Oh, the doctors, I remember that show. That was great. They treated me really well. He's like, I feel like I'm talking to one of my colleagues now. Yeah, I know. And I was so flattered.
Well, and especially just from the Stanford, Oxford educated mind that we're going to dive into in the episode, there's in the 2024 ability to dive into almost anything online with these tools like we just mentioned. You can go so deep. Magic Mind, I had no background in food science whatsoever, and through just a personal need, started with needing to make Magic Mind, and then for myself, and then it turned into this passion area where years later writing a book on this whole world out of this self-education. So I wouldn't ever distrust your own ability to self-educate on these things. But to round out what you just mentioned on the fertility side, would you mind just walking through some of the things that you changed that you'd never go back and maybe never thought about before changing?
Some of the basic things I think is sugar, is one of the biggest, and really reducing, and the types, that you're getting. Of course, fructose is great, but juice on its own without, the fiber and the body of the fruit you're not getting the same sort of nutrition profile. You're kind of just getting a lot of fructose. We don't use any antiperspirant. We use deodorant. We don't smell, but we did take any antiperspirant out.
I can concur on that. Yeah.
We took antiperspirant aluminum out of our, I was going to say diet, but out of our armpits. Since found other great, natural replacements.
What do you use? Yeah.
There's one that my wife, I don't know if this is the name or the flavor or the smell, but it's called Sand and Stone. And it smells almost like Palo Santo and some sort of salt, like I don't know, it's a woody kind of. I'd let you sniff, James, but
well, it's doing its job.
But it's doing its job. But the point being is there's just so many things that we don't think about and that we've been putting on and in our bodies for so long. And I grew up as the son of a dermatologist. I thought, well, there's the epidermis. This is our outer layer. What is it there for? It's to protect us. So I can get things on it. I can wash it off. Mm-hmm. And I kind of always looked at it that way and just really kind of forgot about the absorption qualities, obviously, that our body has. And that there's just so many things we're finding out more, like, with sunscreens. We really kind of researched what was the best. As I think mineral now is the best. But at the time, like, we were always looking for anything we could without dyes and perfumes. This is like the early days of, when people were the sensitive version of things, which still had so many chemicals and all this. We had to really kind of source out and find in other stores, but just kind of building that. And my wife started using Beauty Counter, which also had all natural products, and checking those against that website, like I would tell you. And a lot of there's so much toxicity in common makeup. So finding other alternative versions of things that she liked. And, that's also been kind of a bit of, I wouldn't say our business. I'm not a person who makes a lot of money off, but with Instagram and with our interests, what's been great is getting to know people in the wellness space, and having a kind of an entree to them, or intro, because of Instagram would kind of, it gave you a place to reach out and go, hey, contacting you because I'm really excited about something you're doing. And so our interest just in repairing our bodies and those of our family then became like the way we approach things. Is I'm a bit of the everyman when it comes to it. I don't purport to know the best thing. I don't like to go on a lot about stuff because I feel like the science is always changing. Things are always changing. Later, yeah. And I may be wrong about certain things. I know, but for me, and it's the same way I approached this. And when I say this, I say holding a bottle of Magic Mind is I'm going to try it. And it doesn't mean I'm going to try out anything crazy. And then therefore, meaning if it's something that I'm hearing about, there's a new way of, whether it's the way I train, the different things I put in my body, again, like Magic Mind, I implement it. And see how I like it, see how it's something that functions for me. It's not, I might say, thanks for sending this, but I'm not going to say anything about it until I've tried it for myself, to know that when I'm saying something, that I'm being honest. So I feel like I'm a bit of the everyman in this. My wife and I both approach it, even on her site. She's a big soil advocate and into regenerative agriculture. We both are. into a lot of, I don't know, wellness and everything in that space, spirituality, really kind of plumbing the depths of human consciousness and how we interact with the world and our children, and changing the way we're programmed from, the way our parents had limitations on them. Right? It's exciting. It's and if you're okay, I'm not even going to say doing the work. I don't want to say that, but if you're okay looking inside and being curious, it's exciting to see what we're capable of. Like before we were talking about breathing and taking time to consciously think about how we get food before we ingest it, like a consciousness, right? And you study Eastern philosophy and belief, and there's an idea of a meditation in everything we do. I drink this glass of water, I think about it coming in, and if I'm really hungover and then I have a big glass of water, I can feel as the cells start to fill up, but consciously doing things. And it can sound really entitled at times. It can sound, oh, that must be nice being able to, but look, I'm a father of two. I don't have the perfect life I don't have nannies, and we hardly can get a babysitter whenever we need it. So, I'm there with my children. I'm spending that time. I know what it's like. I'm in the trenches and the frustration of being a parent, of being married, of sharing your life with someone, like all these kind of things. But to me, I just keep learning about it because I had an idea about how it all would be. And here I am now in it. I'm learning so much more than I thought I would. I thought I would know a lot by now, but I'm actually like in a place to learn. So when I guess I kind of diverged a bit, but what I was really going from is that's how I approach wellness in my life, and like how I start to change my mind. So we see how it works for us. We see the evidence on my body may not work the same your body. We have very different in the way we would train, the way we would eat. There's some ways. There's other ways we do meet, and it can come together very beautifully. But, we have different things for different bodies. And sometimes we just need to kind of like try to be open to learn that.
Would your perspective now in life surprise you from, it's a great Tarantino style movie, start from where you are right now and then going backwards to, you and I both grew up in Texas.
I was going to say, like another Texas guy talking like this.
I'll say from my own experience, it surprised me. The things that I love, the things that I advocate for, to especially friends back in Texas, where I'm like, I know this sounds like I just went full California, but I also know that I'm so fine with sounding silly. I have no problem with a cost of sounding silly for something that might be beneficial for you in 4 years, 5 years, when you do hear a chorus of
That's
1,000
not so
other
new.
people.
I've heard that before. It's something
Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean?
To where
exactly.
you're like, I just need, maybe I was the second person you heard it from and the first person you knew on your way to hearing it 12 times before you listened. But I am so fine with, that cost. Do some of your perspectives surprise you from the kid you were growing up in San Antonio?
Definitely. And I also, how old are you?
38.
Okay. Got about 10 years on you, but I do, but if you remember the 90s also, I felt like there was just such a cynicism, and comedy and, worldview, but it was funny, and it was, the way we looked at things, and humor was a bit mean, it was a bit pointed sometimes, but we were all laughing, and that's okay, kind of, that's changed quite a bit. But I kind of grew up in that, and where I'm from, someone goes off and makes it, and the first thing you say before congratulations and everything is you look them in the eye and go, so what, you think you're badass or what? Yeah. It's just kind of like keeping you down home, right? And, you're going to go to California and learn big ideas, and what does California represent? And fast forward now to where we are, California and Texas are in obviously very different views by the rest of the country and of each other. But I don't know, when I've always been proud to be a Texan. And when I came out here back in 1998, to me, that was also one of my calling cards. That was one of my things is, I was Texas boy. I had my Red Wings and didn't really fall into line with a lot of what was going on here in California. I'm very different. I'm from Texas. I wasn't Chicano. We grew up being Hispanic, and we weren't as involved politically. And it wasn't until I got to Stanford that I even, really realized I was a minority, to be honest.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. By the way, is it slight segue or sidebar?
I'm full of segues and sideways.
No, well,
tangents.
I think I'll bring it back to a topic, but sidebar that I'll say that I've noticed in Texas, I feel like there are reasons that we live in California and love it, but love being from Texas as well. And I feel like the race relations in Texas are like 5 times better than the race relations in California.
You probably agree.
I'm interested in your viewpoint. Just that statement of took you to go to California before you even realized that you were in a minority, just because, I don't know, maybe Texas being in the West and kind of my grandfather grew up on the frontier, and there were Native American attacks that would happen and you had to lean on your community like crazy because you knew like, okay, we're in a foreign land almost,
right,
to where you find people anyone that moves into town, you're like, let's be friends, because it just upped our survivability. And I feel like that has created, has led in many ways to Texans just really loving community, really loving each other, contrary to what people think, where it's like race relations they think would be backwards. Friends of mine that are African-American in Dallas that then moved to San Francisco, it's like, dude, it was like 5th on my list of thoughts each day. Moved to the Bay Area, everyone makes sure it's like number 1 or number 2 that I'm thinking about, talking about, and prioritizing in my life.
Well, I think what you said, I mean, because Texas was a very unique place. It was dangerous. I'm talking about, going way back. There was an intermix of, there was people who had land taken away, and there was so much like land dispute.
Yes,
that continued on, and
Native Americans should have been rightfully scared as well. But both sides, I definitely want to make sure that I mention that it wasn't just my family's Lebanese. It wasn't just like immigrants that were scared. Every side, there was
just me, but it was like such a mix, and it was this place where you had to depend on community, and it was but what I take out of that and talking about a different race relations is, for me, like, our culture was celebrated. Our culture was, I wasn't the only one that had brought tacos to school for breakfast, the white kids loved that and loved the breakfast tacos, and not like, the way we fetishize Mexican food and tacos and stuff, like just everywhere in the way people are about in Taco Tuesdays. But I mean, truly, like, this is what their families made for them. This was the comfort food they grew up on, and they knew that same way. Granted, when my grandmother was in school in Texas as a little girl, she got made fun of for bringing tortillas to school, and the other kids had sandwiches, and they had white bread that they could, that was cut nicely. And so I'd say we come a long way. But one of the other reasons for me not feeling that difference was because in San Antonio, we were city council, we were the mayor, we were there was so many professionals I could look around and see, my family included, even though we had also started from very humble beginnings there too. It's, built up, and I had a lot of great role models to look at. So I don't think I ever saw something as not possible growing up, although acting would have never been something that I would have thrown in there,
I can't wait to ask you about that, especially, coming from San Antonio into Hollywood must have been quite the trip that you can I would imagine, only look backwards and be like, okay, those dots do make sense, but from there to here, it's quite the A to B jump. But just to round out shift in mindsets and how you view the world from growing up in Texas to being in California and using words like regenerative farming or talking about the soil, talking about no aluminum. What was it that kind of started to shift your perspective to where you started to question, okay, I'm just going along with so much. Now I'm going to start to be my own detective a little bit. Was it the fertility issues? Was it
that was
anything
when
else?
We really put it into practice. But I mean, I would say things started changing for me. Just fitness became a real big focus for me in a way that I was always kind of searching out the best ways. I got caught up in the CrossFit craze for a bit. Got all my family caught up in it. My mother, who had osteoporosis and was told by her doctor not to do anything more than walk, and even then not fast. Now deadlifts like 210 pounds five times in a row, and her osteoporosis is gone, and she's off the meds. And, so again, like a lot of proof through trial and just being informed and doing the research. But my family then got into that too. And my sister, I moved out here. She ran a CrossFit gym over here in LA that was very popular for a long time called Brick. and she competed with the teams at CrossFit Games. I competed in the early days when a guy my size could compete, but that was way back in like 2008 or 10, I think. Fitness kind of was the place I started to diverge, and then it became about food, and it was just, family back home was maybe struggling with that a little bit more, or obesity was something that nobody in my family was ever, really morbidly obese, but meaning like it was always something dealing with and trying to, because the food we eat there too, and the types of food and the way we were eating and the way we look at food. There's just so many things that are very difficult once you start delving into that, whether it's the really good stuff is very expensive, and it's a hard thing to kind of recommend to somebody who's living in a food desert who doesn't even have access to produce, doesn't have access to clean, quality meats, and but is surrounded by fast food restaurants, which make it a cheaper choice to spend $10 and feed her family for 2 days off of, what you can buy. We're kind of
and tastes
programmed
amazing
to fail.
For how cheap it is.
And it hits all the high notes on, our body, which these are these things we become addicted to. And I understand that. I mean, I didn't grow up with a lot, money or anything, a lot of love and family, but, parents divorced when I was early. We were latchkey kids. Which meant that, my mom worked 9 to 5 and we got home from school. We, had literally a key around our neck that we'd open the door and watch TV, play till she got home from work, and that became my thing, was watching TV. But we grew up on all the crappy foods, what I'm trying to say. Like, I ate my weight in Doritos daily and Dr. Pepper and sodas. But that was what you did. When you were thirsty, you got a soda. Mm-hmm. That was, we've all been programmed so much. So I think it was food choices slowly changed from there. And then I would go home, and there's just kind of a difference between, like, when every time I'd eat there, I was like, geez, I just feel so heavy and full, and I'd want to sleep after breakfast and not eat till dinner. And I was like, I can't live like that. How did I do this?
Right. I used to love barbecue. Grew up in Texas. It's a religion. And we were just talking about it before we hit record. Obviously a religion, because we touched on it in the first few minutes of us chatting. And yet when I go back, I can't eat it. It's so heavy. Even just saying it out loud right now, I feel like a lightweight. But you get attuned to really high quality or just different quality meats, and then you go home and it's the local barbecue joint that's been around for 25 years was not hitting the best ones in Dallas.
Right.
It was just the local ones. And in building Magic Mind, you see, like, each year you can make these choices. And if you're not careful, if you're just thinking about margin, profits, or the business is going in the wrong direction and you're trying to save, there are so many options. On a PDF that's emailed to you, you could switch to this ingredient, switch to this ingredient. And 25 years in of a mediocre barbecue place that's, has a Cisco truck going to the back, every morning, and they could just change out this for this, change out this for this. Maybe that's happened in the last 2 decades, but last time I had it, I was like, this is so unenjoyable. Could not sleep. And red meat in general is hard to digest, but whatever that red meat was really hard to digest. I was like, that was decent on the lips, and then it was probably lost 2 or 3 hours of sleep for that meal.
Some of it's also the very high fat, you're ingesting a little bit more. If you have like a really good beef rib and there's a hunk, fat that you're taking in. But I'm a barbecue lover still. I smoke meats. I love my Traeger, and I'm always like out cooking on things. But it's definitely changed my approach, because I feel like I could have done it every day back then, and I think I did. But I do red meat, but for me it's, we're regenerative. So we get from Rep Provisions is the place we get. It's this company out of Oklahoma. For people that are hearing that term for the first time, and I am in that camp, I've only heard it a handful of times. I find that so hard to believe.
I know, which is
crazy.
That's why people that get really interested in this stuff need to advocate, because you need to hear it 12 times or be in conversation with someone where I can ask this question. Can you tell me what regenerative
I'll probably butcher
means?
it and things, but my understanding, what this kind of follows, there's so many great people and links to, Instagram is full of like the Carbonauts and Carbon Cowboys, Rep Provisions. Eric Perner there talks a lot about it. But regenerative agriculture is essentially a kind of symbiotic network of animals and plants and the environment working together in the way they're supposed to, in a system that not only traps carbon into the ground, but how we use a living soil. It's not tilled. It's not, it doesn't lay barren and then injected with fertilizers
Steroids
right
and
before, and fertilizers right before. It is land that is, for example, with Eric Perner, they're bringing back a lot of pastoral grasses and a lot of native grasses and things that have kind of species that have kind of started to die out, because what a lot of people don't understand or know about America is like it used to be in the plains, there was these grasses that were taller than, a human. And there was like these sea of grass and a forest primeval that like ended right where this grass started, that was a thick, like it looked a lot different than, what we've now done to this country. And also just obviously, the evolution of the land. In Eric's case, what they do is they'll do rotational grazing, right? With paddocks, right? And paddocks are, your different, think of fenced off squares and think of 4, maybe one big square divided into 4 equal squares. And think of those as a paddock where the animals will be grazing, eating, pooping, trotting all that poop down into the ground, fertilizer, eating back a lot of the grasses and, that also getting pushed back in. And then they will rotate them to another paddock, another area of grassland where that's fresh. And then they'll use that soil that's now ready for then the crops. And so the animals are kind of moving along like they would in nature, and everything else is happening behind them. And so we're using the animals to better the soil, to better what we're bringing out of it, in a higher nutrition profile, no pesticide use. So there's no runoff, no contamination, but then also bringing the butterflies back and the pollinators back and seeing the way the land works in that kind of symbiosis. A very easy way to get into it and to see the beginnings of it in popular culture is there was a really good documentary called The Biggest Little Farm that I think is still on Netflix, and it's a Disney property, so it could be on there too. And they're going to be doing a TV show, and they're just outside of town here in Moore Park, Apricot Lane Farms. And they documented their journey in this awesome documentary where they take this land of orchards and random planting and turn it into this farm where each time a problem would come and they'd find something in nature to solve it, and would watch how these things would kind of take over, and it'd be a wave of maybe an uncontrollable pest, but then something else that they would help foster would come around to meet that. And in its way, they find this really delicate balance of life. And whether that's
Very
pests or that's, environmental conditions, you learn that the earth will provide, that there are answers within that aren't chemical or aren't, always they're ancient wisdom a lot of times. A lot of the stuff that even my wife now uses with her own gardening is things that were used by native cultures way back that are much simpler, and uses, marigolds and other things that are planted alongside crops. So the pests go at those and not at the crops you want to eat, but not having to lay down pesticide or anything.
Right.
So it's looking at all these kind of solutions that already exist in nature and kind of getting the land to work like that.
And this is probably way overly simplistic, but is the alternative and a lot of conventional farming today, is it just same crops, same land,
monocrop.
over and over? Over and over, monocrop. So,
and if you
can you walk us through what a conventional farm?
Well, conventional farm, if you drive between San Francisco, LA, we were talking about that a lot, and I'm sure you've done that drive. We've both flown that a lot, I know, but doing that drive, you see so much farmland there in the Central Valley, and the majority of it, when there's not a crop on it, you will see is just dead.
Barren,
dead. There is not worms living in this. It's just devoid of anything until right before they want to then farm. Fertilizer goes in, and then the seed, and then it's just done all over again. And there's never any richness built up in the soil. The difficult thing about organic and why it's so expensive and regenerative is because the licensing is really hard to get, for one. Farms have to go through as much as a 3-year, if not more, process sometimes of changing over from methods. You have to let the ground repair itself. You have to remove things if there are contaminants. So it's a very difficult thing. But what I like is something that Eric Perner at Rep Provisions is doing is and what I see the Carbon Cowboys doing a lot too, of traveling the country and talking to farmers. But what Eric is doing is, and what we do by buying his meat and supporting this model, which is what we're doing. We want to make it less expensive for everybody. We want this to be something that everybody can access, not just some people in privileged. They can afford to pay a little bit more for their meat. And so what Eric does is he takes these farmers who a lot of times are struggling or have a crop that is just constantly having a hard time with the environment, or is just a subsidized crop that isn't really doing anything for them, and they're having a really difficult time. He's showing them how to turn regenerative and giving them a place to sell, And what they also do is that there's a conscious effort in how they treat the animal too. They're members of the family. They are processed very close, whereas now they put them in a paddock, load them up onto the truck, and they might have as much as maybe an hour drive. Whereas before, you're talking about sometimes days drive, to a whole other side of the country, where then they're put in a feeding lot for 120 days, just plied up with grain, fattened up, and then where they're diseased, and then taking to slaughterhouses, which don't have very humane practices.
You want to hear something that has stuck with me for, I don't know, I heard it maybe 4 years ago. You never heard the context, but you're like, why did that person say that? Or why did that stick it's singed in my brain now. I can't unhear that. And I don't even I still don't have the full story, but my father-in-law, this will make sense after I say it. I was getting coffee with my father-in-law, and one of his friends stopped by to the table and said, hey, take up a seat, George. And so this guy sits down with us, chats with us for 12 minutes. But during those 12 minutes, my father-in-law is like, George and I know each other from Fort Worth, and he was working for so-and-so family before now moving over to Dallas, maybe a few years ago. George starts telling a little bit about his background, and he had worked in the family office, I think like the wealth management side of the family office of a sausage manufacturer in Fort Worth. And he goes, well, he just happens to say this random line in the conversation.
I knew it was going to be about, I'm not going to eat sausage or hot dog after this. Stop things that fall into a sausage press.
If you go somewhere good, high integrity, then you don't have to worry about this. But he said, well, and you can never trust a family that runs a sausage factory. So ... And I was like, hold on, what did he mean by that? You can never trust a family that runs a sausage. And for hours, now days, and now years, I have always wondered and wish I had that moment of time back to be like, George, can you tell me specifically what you mean by you can never trust a family that runs a sausage factory? Because my imagination has run wild and probably directionally accurate.
You can fit quite a few things in sausage casing.
Exactly. So that's a little earworm that was given to me, and now I've given it every listener as well as you, that you won't be able to unhear. Apparently, you can never trust a family that runs a sausage factory. The amount of things that go on behind the scenes, even within a beverage like Magic Mind, there are so many producers that will try to sell us matcha. We use a ceremonial grade Japanese matcha, amazing matcha in our bottles. But there's so many people that will try to sell us matcha that has heavy metals in it that certainly is coming from non-regenerative farms, sources, I'm sure. And we still, even with all of our vetting that we do, this is like the most overly researched beverage ever, because I never even intended to start a beverage company. This is just for me and my morning routine. So we do all of this research on every one of our suppliers, but also every batch, every ingredient that gets sent to our manufacturer gets tested before it's put in the drink. Then after it's every batch, every production, we run a production run every 2 weeks, then gets tested again in aggregate to make sure nothing, in individual ingredients was low, but then in aggregate it gets high, so it sets off any heavy metals or anything like that just from the soil. But there are matchas that would get sent our way, even from Japan, and there'd be high lead content. And it's like, oh yeah, but this is high grade, this is ceremonial grade.
And there's something to shade
matcha
grown too, isn't there?
Yeah, well, all matcha is shade grown.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the difference between matcha and green tea, in addition to using the whole tea leaf, which is ground up. That's why it's powder. The last 2 to 3 weeks of matcha teas, that type of green tea, is under shade to where it stresses the entire leaf out to where it sends even more of the catechins, even more of the nutrient profile to each leaf, to where then when you take the shade away and you actually use the tea leaf.
Catechins, thanks for the pronunciation on that one. I read a lot of stuff, so I never get to hear it out loud a lot of times. Catechins is what it looks like.
Catechins, yeah. The polyphenols, the catechins, even the caffeine, but also every the antioxidants,
the
every part of
ashwagandha.
Yep. And so that's just on the matcha. On every other ingredient in Magic Mind, none of them are shade grown like matcha. It's a really unique thing that they do within matcha. But this conversation is making me think like we should not only test for anything that would be problematic in any way, but we should also start to look for suppliers that are regeneratively growing. The downside is it does make it more expensive, but
it's more expensive, yeah.
The solution is to increase the number of people clamoring for it.
And the scary thing is if you haven't
we
heard...
already do organic, which has also come out of kind of left field over the last 20 years. So maybe regenerative is just ring the alarm bell.
It is that next thing, you know. I mean, we're seeing a lot with restaurants, we're seeing a lot at grocery stores, regenerative products. Patagonia has been leading the way with if you didn't know, they make food, like soup mixes and, you know.
I've seen like the little canisters
and regenerative
fish.
Is a big thing that everything they're getting involved in. There's a few other big companies like that are going that route. You reminded me, I was going to ask you about going regenerative with everything and how incredible that could be, because not only are you talking about your polyphenols and, you know, or your like phytochemicals and things like that are going to also be increased. There's just something about food that has born from soil the way it's supposed to be. You know, I mean, I think it's great that when we're looking at food scarcity, that there's other things, you know, hydroponics and able to make a lot of lettuce with a small tower, you know, and all these kind of different advancements there are in that kind of area. But when it comes to really nutrient dense food, soil is needed. And with regenerative, if you don't know, one of the scary things is that when I first found this out, I think it was 10 years ago, we had 60 harvests left. And what that means is that our topsoil is going away.
60, like left in the chamber.
Yeah.
Like 60 years, does that translate roughly?
Roughly like, you know, on a year.
Oh, wow.
But like we have 50 more harvests. And so that's kind of also what regenerative aims to, you know, you'll see, you can look up some really interesting videos of people who have transformed land into like from a desert into a beautiful functioning, you know, oasis with water, obviously a lot of water, but how they're able to take land that wasn't always that way and bring it back. It's been pretty incredible. You'll see in places you wouldn't even believe. Also has just this kind of, like I said, the symbiosis with life. That what's really interesting is Eric at Rep Provisions has a really good relationship with like the Audubon Society, because they're seeing like certain birds that are coming back to areas that weren't before and helping with habitats, and birds that are on their way during migration, providing, you know, stop-offs, and maybe the decision on what they choose to grow, you know, what sort of native grasses and different things they and the same thing with butterflies. You know, they even include seed a lot of times when you get your meat, they'll, you know, for you to plan around your house for a stop-off point for monarchs as they're on there, because we need these things, you know, we need the bees, and their habitats need to be saved. You know, where are they going to be? In your park on the corner? You know, we talk a lot about homesteading and people want to get back to the land and getting our food from that, but you know, and you can live on your phone and feel that world, but then most of us are living in a city right outside these doors right now, you know, asphalt and concrete and very little green life except what we've kind of hacked into order and shape, you know, or in our yards. And we
got turf right outside of here. Yeah.
You know, we're so far removed from it, and I can't help but feel, I mean, the planet absorbs radiation. It's absorbing X-rays from across the universe, like all these things that kind of, and it has a pull on us. It literally has gravitational pull, but like, you know, we're spinning through the air with all these things happening, and to think that all doesn't have an effect on us, or energy, or, you know, when people talk about grounding, right? Getting out on the ground and just feeling your feet in the ground, and there's an electric charge that, you know, our bodies are given, and not like a charge like you're charging your phone, but there's, you know,
there's negative ions from it. I could talk about grounding for 20 minutes around the body producing just a lot of, through the oxidative stress, producing a lot of free radicals that are positively charged. If you can then get into soil, it's negatively charged. That is a lot less chaotically charged. Then it's neutralizing to anything that is positively charged. And our bodies are, what is so interesting about each topic that we're talking about, you can go look these things up on Consensus, which is the thread is that people can look instead of being like, oh, well, with my 2 visits a year with my doctor, or maybe 1, I'll bring up these topics that Nicholas was saying in this podcast. Instead, it's like, let me look that up. Oh, damn, the research seems to be quite suggestive in this direction. Or they can look up any of the 3-syllable words that we've used. Regenerative, 4 syllables for that one. But you can look them up and be like, oh, wow, that actually sounds quite reasonable, which also gives me courage to bring it up to the friend and be like, maybe they only need to hear this 7 times because, 20 years ago, they didn't need to hear it 50. But today, 7th time, they can look it up and say, should I eat organic for just the nutrient profile of the food? Because you can throw a shit ton of steroids in the form of fertilizers into the fruit, the produce the vegetables that we're eating, but the calorie density will be more or less the same, if not, and it sounds like with regenerative, much higher than a farm that is using. I remember seeing a stat 2 or 3 years ago that the average vegetation in America has anywhere between 50 to 90% less nutrition than it had 100 years ago because of
I heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah, the less.
They say the carrot your parents ate even was not the same you have, and
then you suffer from. Did you say
my mother had osteoporosis? Right?
Osteoporosis, or friends that, like a friend of mine had really bad psoriasis, and I was like, try this. Send him a link, and it was a simple vitamin complex. Tried it, went away. That nutrient profile that he now needs to supplement, you are not getting in Brooklyn with a typical diet of just eating things from
or also store. Like you said, talking about it with your doctor twice a year. A lot of times most doctors aren't clue. They don't look at nutrition other than the SAD diet, the standard American diet, the pyramid, which needs to be flipped on its head.
The General Mills provided pyramid, yeah.
And when you delve into that, and cereal and what that was invented for is like an anti-masturbatory food.
Really?
Did you hear about that?
Wait, what? No, please spend 3 minutes telling me about that.
I won't even do it justice, but
that sounds awesome. But I already know this is the social clip, one of the social clips from the episode. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, tell us more.
No, I mean, I wish I want to look it up again, but something about, I think it was General Mills, but like cornflakes, that Kellogg's cornflakes were developed because something about the corn and what it would do to, I don't want to hurt the corn industry here and say it's going to, make you flaccid or anything, but there's a story and you got to look it up, and it's
we are
pretty
also,
well known. You'd be surprised.
Also going to put that in the show notes, even if it's to the daily, what is it, the Mirror or something? We will show, we will put that in the show notes too.
My concern is though that there's so much that you can, like you said, we can look up. You can look up all these hot button topics and a whole world will unfold, and that's exciting. But there's a lot out there that's just kind of preying on anxieties, and I have to say I'm feeling it as much as anyone else. I don't have, other than a connection to people in the field that I've now been afforded, whether that's people like Dr. Casey Means, who works with levels, continuous glucose monitors, but she also put a book recently about food and how, food is medicine and just how we look at food.
Good Energy? Is that
Good Energy,
yeah.
Right. Such a good book. But people like her, Dr. Mark Hyman, right? Drew Pirahit, who does the Broken Brain podcast. But guys like this that I have access to that are really informed and so much smarter than me, that have been able to, look through research and are continually asking those questions. Casey was a physician who left conventional medicine to go to more of a functional medicine approach, seeing the body as a whole, bunch of systems that are very intricately connected to each other. And because of that, they need to work together, not seen as, the way we look at medicine with these specialties, which is great because you need to hone skills for particular, whether surgical procedures or whatnot and diagnosis. But when it comes down to it, you have to have somebody who's also looking at the system as a whole and realizing that just because, now that you have high blood pressure, you have this medicine, and every guy I know over 35 is like on Prilosec or some sort of, what are they called? An inhibitor, for reflux and all these kind of things, like these problems that things we're exposed to in food we have, that if we're looking at the whole system and everything as a whole, we could see, rather than, oh, you have this symptom, well, we're going to give you this to kill that symptom, and not look for what the cause is. So there's a lot of people that can feed off of, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of quick fervor. People are trying to come up with drinks and things that aren't as researched, that don't care. I talk to you, James, and I've gotten to meet you, and I see what the way you feel.
There's a shot out there that the two fastest growing beverages and shots on the market, one is Magic Mind, and the other one is a drink called Feel Free. That is, it's almost like the antichrist of beverages.
Bizarro
the Bizarro Magic Wine. And it uses a highly addictive opiate-like ingredient called kratom. And they don't list kratom as an ingredient, which is downright illegal. They're being sued right now in a few different states and banned, I believe, in Georgia. I don't know exactly which states they're banned in. And
they have RC with peanuts in it in Georgia. I'm surprised.
I know, seriously. And it's wild to me that there are people that are making that drink, like people part of the company making that drink. They have gotten so many people that are substance abuse prone now drinking 5, 7, 8, 10 of these a day. Now they disclose it, but for 2 years, they didn't disclose that kratom was an ingredient. They would just talk about one of the other ingredients, kava, which is more or less harmless. But
I had some kava in Fiji.
So yeah, it's crazy that people yes, to exactly your point, really get to know the products that you consume in the same way you get to know people that you would invite into your home, get to know the products that you consume. Maybe consume less so that you can spend some of the time. Everybody has an hour a week to get to know one product that you love. All right, you love this product, get to know some of the ingredients. Look it up online with Consensus is one hell of a resource, but just Google some of it. Is a white bread sandwich lunch or In-N-Out for lunch every day? Is that a good choice? You might start to change some of your habits. But informing ourselves is it's as ridiculous as just inviting anyone off the street into your home to just add it. Once in a while is totally fine. But adding something into your weekly rotation that you're not consciously saying, okay, is Taco Bell actually a great choice? Costs aside, because I know that it is inexpensive, but Instapot is one hell of a great way to make $3 meals. Same cost as Taco Bell, a little more. There are ways around it, but not a whole lot of work.
We're always going to find a way to procrastinate out of it, right? And not do that, which also I look to Magic Mind to help, because I'm one of the biggest procrastinators you'll know. And for me, it's kind of, that's the start. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do something. I grab one. My shot, I'm not up to 5 or 8 a day. I feel guilty when I do too. I'm like,
yeah, no, I always do. Matthew McConaughey's publicist, one of the funniest emails I've ever gotten, and it might have been for her, might have been for, who knows, might have been for Matthew, but she was like, is 3 a day okay? And I was like, better make some lifestyle choices if you feel like you need 3 energy beverages a day. I highly recommend just 1 a day. Do you mind telling us a little bit about how you came across Magic Mind and what's changed since you started incorporating it? Because you are one of our favorite customers. Oh man, I'm on the planet.
I'm a big lover. For me, just the background, even something like this, is that I'm always kind of doing research on the next thing. I'm not looking to be the guy that's taking a bunch of supplements as much as, I'm interested in that. I think there's a big difference between looking at something that can do a lot for you and your body, and then, okay, well, then I'm just going to have a shit ton of it, and then that's going to make me really great. I don't think the body works that way, and I think that we can only assimilate into our body a certain amount of, different things have their different levels, but after a while, it all becomes expensive pee, as my dad used to say when I talked about taking a multivitamin, you want to talk about the old school, and the new school, very differing opinions there. But for me, it's still important to find those things that if I can boil it down to a few things. Creatine is one of those for me because there's just a lot of great science on it, and Pretty Harmless has a lot of great benefits with training. But beyond that, I'm more interested in a lot of these other natural things, whether it be ashwagandha. Coffee upsets my stomach. I loved it, and it was something I spent a lot of time, even when I was shooting in Australia, really getting to know better coffee, and there's a different kind of respect for coffee there. I love the ritual to it. I've never been the person that's like, don't talk to me until I've had my coffee. Once I have, never been that guy. I've always been able to either have it and go right to sleep if I wanted to, or have it and decide to be up. It felt like a decision I was making, unlike other jittery things, like 5-hour energy, just play with it. And then you'd have this kind of, and you couldn't really ever control it. Sometimes, and I have to perform sometimes.
3.5 Red Bulls for people that don't know. 5-hour energy has the caffeine equivalent of 80 milligrams, 250. So it is, it's over 3 Red Bulls.
That's, crazy
Sorry,
to me.
2.5 Red Bulls. Had to do the math in public, sorry.
But looking for these other things that, like I said, like matcha now is something because I'm off of coffee, and it gives me a lot of stomach distress, especially on an empty stomach. And then I found even when I'm eating stuff, it just causes a lot of rumbling, whether it's the acid or what. I'm done trying to find out and try all these different kind of things, because for me, there's so many other beverages out there, and to me, green tea is one of those that's great, but I don't always need to sit there and slow sip something. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's like, I still want to get that in. I want the benefit of the energy, but I'll tell you what, for me, what really hit me with Magic Mind the first time I was given by my friend Greg Link was the focus. I felt like a drop in. And I have a hard time. I'm so aware of all the things going on, and with my children and my wife, who is so organized and so good at getting things done. I'm the kind of guy that everything's up in the air, and I'm trying to balance it all. And then miraculously things happen, and then miraculously they'll happen on a high level. And so then I'm, encouraged to continue this. And that's because I wouldn't be able to like go from one thing and have a certain focus. And I feel like when I start off with that intention and I want to get some work done, or even just starting my day and I'm ready to drop into it, because with the kids, I don't, you're in. I got to wake up early, and I got to be up before them. I work out before, because I don't want to, those are my non-negotiables. But when I can get everything together in one, I was so interested, like say green tea, ashwagandha, bacopa complex, like all these things that I had heard so many great things about, and then for them all to be together in one, and to go together so well is another thing, not only in the flavor, but just kind of, it didn't feel like two antithetical or several antithetical things being put together, it works and for a reason. But being able to get all these goodies in one is, I think, kind of the biggest thing for me. And I know that I've gotten it in that day. So like for the very few supplements I take, and I count this along with almost that supplement. It's my coffee, it's my day starter, it's kind of a lot of things all rolled into one. And it's also like how I kick it off and I say, okay, we're going to get to work now. And so it's a mindset.
You said that you're always bringing it over to friends. Have you noticed any friends start to drink it because of your recommendation?
People also hit me up because when I love something, I love something. And I'm really remiss, because there's a lot of things I love, but I've been doing the slow like research on it, the 100 days kind of thing. I need to put like my favorite things. I need to put it out there for people to, because I get a lot of questions about different aspects of things that I'll talk about, or, that I would recommend. And I need to do that.
Like, have you noticed any friends write you back afterwards of like, oh my God, this
for
stuff.
One, initially it'll start off because I'm, so excited about it that they'll write like, hey, so what's up with this? Is this Magic Mind for real? Like, do you really feel that way? Are you getting paid? And I'm like, I'm not getting paid.
That's our biggest hurdle for people, is that they just have heard these promises before and like, it probably doesn't work that well. They don't know if they want to know, is the magic real?
Right. So and the other thing though too is I think it's the way you approach it, because I messed around with ayahuasca once, and I had a shaman, here in Beverly Hills. No, but here in LA, we did it, and we were all, I learned something interesting. I think it was a large part of what I was probably supposed to learn and still grapple with. But he said, I went back for seconds, which I always do.
Oh, right. I've done that too.
I went back for a little bit more. And he told me, he didn't say this to anyone else who had, but he told me, he said, stop chasing the high. And I feel like that's our approach with things, where people are like, does it really work? Does this? And I'm like, well, what does work mean to you? If work means, are you going to feel like that thing with 10-hour energy, 5-hour energy that feels like 10 hours, but this kind of feeling of cracked out and wow, that really works. I'm awake. I don't want to feel like that. I don't like feeling out of control. Is it something where I am going to feel focused, but it takes something from me too. I mean, I can't I don't lay in my bed and put this down and then lay back and wait for it to go. I mean, there's a motivation that comes with it. That's why I say, for me, it's the beginning of it. This is where it starts. I put it down and I'm like, okay, we're going to get some work done today. So it's also the way I approach it. So for me, does it work? I remember the first time I had it and I had coffee, and I didn't like, I know that some people can mix it, but you have to give yourself a little bit. But I was just a little like, oh yeah, okay, wow. This is working. Yeah. And then when I've had it again, I get the drop in, and it's just a nice, and that's what I'm saying is I worry that if people are chasing a high, or I think because I'm that way. Like I want to feel, why not feel different? If you have this kind of blissful feeling, well, why not feel that throughout the day? I'm going to run errands. Why not be high for that? You know, and that kind of takes over and we forget to check in and say, well, how do I feel right now? Actually, I feel pretty good. Why am I grabbing this thing and having it? Like the coffee, like I say to people who I feel are tethered to certain things like that we just start to kind of do it by rote, and we know better, or we know, oh, maybe this isn't serving me, or, you know, not really the way to go through life. And yet it's hard to step away from that and realize that, and quiet everything. And I think that's what, you know, you get with meditation, you get with breathing exercises, and really dropping in, whether it's the times when you're challenging yourself with, like, I'm an avid ice plunger. I love, you know, ice baths, those kind of things. And it's really tough for my head, just as it's tough for me to get up at 5, 6 a.m. and go out there and start doing my workout when my body is like just waking up and hurting. There's gotta be a check-in, and it's hard to stop because we wake up, we pick up our phone, we go to social media, or we go to our email, we get on that bicycle, and we don't check in. So we just start, okay, that's what I do this day. I get my coffee.
I've never heard, that's actually a really great point of, like, what does it work mean to you? Because that is a huge distinction in a culture that is absolutely fine with our two addictions of as much ambition as you can muster and as much caffeine as you can take. Like, our culture is not very friendly with many addictions, but caffeine, more coffee, more energy drinks, totally not just permissive, but somewhat encouraging toward, like you said, some people are just like, don't talk to me before my first cup of coffee.
Right.
If you were to say that about any other drug, and caffeine's one hell of a drug, then people would be like, whoa.
Don't talk to me until I've had my second vodka in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like,
now
okay,
daddy's ready to talk. Yeah, I mean,
you got a problem.
Can't get away with that.
And that's a really great distinction of what does work mean for you? Because if it is like, if you're chasing an escape from how you feel, then you're looking for something that not only probably has the actual qualities of a drug, but is not going to be healthy in the long run. Because whatever is meaningful for you in that day, we should all cultivate wanting to be there for it, not mentally escaping.
I've also realized that anything that's really worth it for me, it takes some effort. It takes consistency. And that's like with things like the additives, even that are in, I say additives, but the ingredients, like, you know, the adaptogens, these aren't things always that, they're not all that you take, and it's something you have to build on it. You know, it's something that you got to put in. It's like when you're working out and I had a trainer who said, you know, each day you're laying a brick and you got time to lay another brick. And it's an investment is what I find in myself. And so I know that I'm putting good things in my body, and I'm building up on that, and I'm doing it not just one day and thinking, oh, this is going to take care of everything, but a practice.
Yeah.
And through that practice, this is the step off, you know, for me, then it's the next things after that. And like I said at the beginning, I'm the everyman when it comes to a lot of this, because I'm struggling with it. I wish I had a perfect routine that I could point to. And I say, I wake up and I do my morning pages, and then I, you know, go on a run with my daughter, and then I come in and I get the eggs from the chicken coop, and I get in my cold plunge. And, you know, this is sometimes a morning that I have, actually, but I'm not always, you know, I'm not always doing that, and I'm not always, you know, performing the way that I need to, or I'm taking that shortcut. But what I've really found is when you're laying down these bricks and that consistency, it takes work. The instant gratification that we are all becoming addicted to is what I feel is killing us. It's killing our spirit. I find through being uncomfortable and through work and pushing my body, that is how I'm kind of fighting it in a way, or, you know, I'm not going so softly into that good night. I want to change. I'm not a big biohacker, but at the same time, I think where we've gotten to as the norm, whether that's diet, exercise, whatever, but the way we see that is so far off from how we're supposed to be and how naturally this body needs to be kept up. There's no perfect blueprint. That's the crazy thing. We have all these additives and things we can put on, and some people choose running. Some people choose really crazy heavy weightlifting, and people choose everything in between. And we're all trying to see, well, what's perfect for this body? Well, we're all different models and different sports cars and luxury vehicles. And so there's going to be different things. We come from different parts of the world, and our body is made to react differently. You know, I mean, like cholesterol with native peoples is a very different thing than cholesterol from someone from Eastern Europe, and how the body uses these.
Yeah,
like we're learning so much about all that.
It's making me, as you're talking, it's making me think there almost should be a phrase of, there are as many as many paths to health as there are people on earth, because everybody's coming from a different place with a different makeup.
And something that works for me may not work at all for someone else. And we have to, be aware of that, as well as may not be available. We get to talk and sit in this lovely room and talk about routines or talk about our lives or a life analyzed, and in repose, we can, talk about philosophy or all these things you've been able to learn and teach people. When we talk about, all these things, and we can sit here and analyze a routine, we can analyze our life and look back on, oh, wow, I really don't like how I reacted with my friend during that conversation. Or, I really snapped at my daughter and I didn't even tell her I'm sorry that, hey, Dad, it was wrong to talk to you that way because I'm the dad. And I just said, well, because I said so, and walked off. There's an opportunity there. But what I'm saying is even be able to look at all this is sometimes just feels so privileged. Like the famous quote, so many people are living quiet lives of desperation, but like there's so many things to happen now. And I think it's, it's social media and it's media and it's people not being happy, that there's just so much noise that it's really hard to turn it off. And I have a hard time just stopping too.
I've heard that so frequently that it's, especially in teaching philosophy, it's privileged to talk about these. A friend said this while we were walking down
and
the
sometimes
beach.
People say that as a critique, for therapy, and go, oh, wow, how
privileged you get to see a therapist.
You get to sit there and look at your, navel gaze.
The thing that I want to push back is I don't think it's P word, that privilege word is such an easy way to avoid accountability for something that we all actually do have our hands on the dials of, and it's prioritization, not privilege. My friend that said this to me was like 4 days ago. This is maybe the fourth or fifth person that had said this recently, of like, don't you think it's such a privilege to be able to have these conversations walking down the beach? We're actually talking about the role of spirituality and parenthood. And I was kind of confused by that. It's like, there have been parents thinking about the role of God in parenting for 10,000 years. This doesn't require the beach, doesn't require a walk down the beach. 100 years ago, the average profession in the US was in agriculture, 14 hours a day. They were thinking about these things. Finding time to talk about it with a friend, that's not a privilege. That's just a prioritization of we had about 45 minutes to chat, and this just happens to be how we prioritized or what he wanted to discuss during that conversation. I think it's really easy to just throw paint on people discussing something that seems esoteric outside of the hustle and bustle of, putting food on the table. But human history is filled with people that put food on the table in quite harsh environments, way harsher than 99% of people on the planet today. We actually live in the most educated, peaceful, and prosperous time in human history. We all live in this, 99% of us all live in this band in which we can prioritize analyzing what we put into our bodies, analyzing our routines, and certainly, like I always say, the anti-commercial for Magic Mind is that should be like fifth on the list of sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, then anything you're adding to your body. But sleep, diet, exercise, stress management, talking about stress management, that is so easy for someone in certain circles to say that's a privilege to be able to talk about that. Yet, every religion, psychology, philosophy, a through line between them all is in some way they're touching on stress management. We just are using these words, stress management, today, but people in crazy harsh conditions 3,000 years ago were still thinking about things like a purpose beyond a selfish pursuit, communal benefit instead of just a selfish one. They were thinking about higher ideals than just putting food on the table. So my pushback on it is I wonder if it's prioritization versus privilege.
I completely agree. I actually like that way of looking at it better, because that's what I mean. I just mean people think that it's something unattainable or outside and don't realize that it's all around them and it's right there. It's just about making it a priority. I mean, because you see people say, well, how do I do that? I have this job, I have this many kids. Because you see people who do it. You see a pregnant mom of 3 who's still making the time, finding it and doing it. And, in that way, finding more energy and finding more vitality, you got to start it. That's the tough part.
Yeah. And it's open for anyone to shoot over comments or DMs on Instagram on where that could be wayward thinking, because it's certainly not fully baked, but just on the umpteenth time of hearing what felt like cop-out of privilege. I was like, you know what? I think there's maybe a fuller way, and maybe we meet in the middle, but an alternative approach or an alternative viewpoint than just privilege. But the last area that I want to touch on with you is all about this inner side of creating. Totally switching gears from the health side or upbringing. I just want to ask an actor, a producer, a creative that goes from project to project. Oftentimes when you don't have, it's almost like I chose the entrepreneurial route because I wanted, kind of in my 20s, wanted full control out of total insecurity, but wanted full control. As an actor, what is the inner side of creating like when, one, I would love to start with just your move here to become an actor. When I would imagine people back in Texas, you touched on it, were like, what there's no way you can't do that. Like we don't allow people to do that.
Yeah.
But then also I would love to know just now, 26 years in, how do you manage the inner side of creating when you could be working on something amazing and then the project ends and it's like you got to start from scratch with the next movie or the next role?
It's tough. I mean, because there's no real security, you know. That's the hard part. You know, you're always hoping you're still relatable, or, you know, some of the people still want to be entertained by and watch, because I feel very fortunate to be an entertainer, but it's something that it's rough, and it's been very difficult. I've been very lucky at several times in my career, but at the same time, I would also argue that luck comes when we're putting ourselves out and pushing. And I didn't know anything. I mean, I didn't tell you, but I lived at 2 Breeze Avenue right here. I moved because I was a Texas boy that wanted to live near the ocean. And I was like, well, I moved to Venice. I didn't know anything. And I lived in a red brick building right there in Ellie Ness's property. And lived there for my first year. It was about constantly getting myself out there. I didn't know anybody. I'd never been to LA. I'd only driven through. I'd been to Disneyland, I think, as a kid. And
Do you think it's even worse being educated at Stanford and then Oxford? Like, do you think there is like even harder because you're like, man, I'm giving up?
Well, I guess there's the alternatives, right? There's the opportunity cost, right? I mean, there's obviously a lot of people I went to school with, you know, startups and so many things, and made a lot of money, but it was something that I found while I was in college. You know, acting was something that I found while I was there, and I never expected it. I never thought about it. And God bless my mother when I told her, I said, you know, it was at graduation, I was like, I think I'm going to continue this act. I was doing a lot of theater in San Francisco. I think I'm going to continue this. And she's like, well, you know what? You've always been able to do anything you put your mind to. This will probably just be another one of those things.
Oh, cool.
You know, did I have, you know, a bottomless bank account? No, but did I have supportive parents that believed in me and that were there for me? Yeah, and that made a big difference, but they didn't have to wait long. You know, it all just happened pretty quickly. It was the right place, right time here. And
one of the things I was really excited about just today is getting to meet in person, because I feel like you haven't even hit your prime at all. Like, I have a feeling that you are just scratching the surface on, the world is just scratching the surface on getting to know
I feel
you.
Like, thank you so much for that. But I feel like that even just about myself, because of, you know, I had a very late start in forming a family. You know, I'm 48 years old now. I got married at 40, had, you know, my 2 kids now, 7.5-year-old girl and a 2.5-year-old boy. And life is a constant set of lessons, learning so much about me, so much about how I grew up, so much about triggers and things, you know, the way we, and also just the little stuff about even parenting that seemed to mean so much, like get off the couch, stop jumping on the couch. And then you start realizing you're like, it's what they do. And the couch is going to be jumped on. And sometimes we just have to live life, and we just have to, you know, drink the bottle, drive the car, you know, scratch up the shiny, you know, pan, and just use it and live. And I found so much more succor in that. I found so much more like vitality in the everyday. And through that, I feel like I'm learning a lot more, because I also did this very unconventional occupation. And I'm also called on to play everybody, right? Or I'm playing all these characters, which are like your friends and neighbors, and I'm supposed to be believable playing them. But if I remove myself from life and I'm in this other position, how am I going to show life and what that looks like and feels like if I'm removed? So I think the more this has brought me into life at its most visceral, I feel so much more open to the possibilities of, what I'm doing as an artist.
For listeners that are in that camp of artists, creators, founders, could you walk us through a specific example, if one comes to mind, of like a peak stress moment in the career, like many of those that I just mentioned, that don't have stability behind them? They have so many beautiful moments that make it all worth it so much of the time. But could you walk us through like a very real, I loved a long form answer as our last question, just a peak stress moment or a peak low, I guess that would be a trough, that you can think about that you're like, yeah, this is part of the territory of this career choice.
Looking back, it's hard to say that because there's so many, like with what we do, what I do, I really step back and looked at, because I have an attitude of like, I've been there before kind of thing, which I think can put people at ease. But at the same time, I don't always share my innermost thoughts on something. Like I can work next to somebody that I grew up watching. And as I said, I was a latchkey kid and I used to switch on the TV and that was my entertainment. That was my they, reared me, right? They brought me up. It was like, I'm a fan before anything. And yet I would be there now working alongside them, and I wouldn't want to make anybody feel funny. So I'd just be doing my job and we'd be having a great time. But I never got the chance to sit there and go, the effect you had, or the amount of times I watched you go through things, or I modeled myself off of this character
Who
of
comes
yours.
to mind as you're telling the story?
I mean, everything from like the very basic of Clint Eastwood when I was watching, the Sergio Leone movies, and he always kind of in the end did the right thing. And, you name it. I mean, Lou Gossett Jr. I got to work with. I mean, all the cast on Resurrection Boulevard that I did, they were all people that I grew up watching. Elizabeth Pena, Tony Plana, Michael De Lorenzo, like they were all, and I'm rubbing shoulders with Edward James Olmos and all these people that were such pioneers that built the way I saw myself as a child, and as a Latino and as an actor, and even now. So I feel like there's so many high stakes things, but I've kind of approached them with a very relaxed attitude that when I look back now, I'm like, whoa, there was a lot of peak. Like when you're doing a show like the one I just got off of NBC La Brea, or the one I was doing for ABC Good Doctor, they're the major leagues. Like you have these huge budgets, each shot, thousands of dollars. When the camera rolls and they say action, you got to be ready. Bomb needs to go off. There needs to be that flicker. We're pack animals, right? We can tell when there's something about someone. We know when it feels right. We know when it's pushed or forced, or we can see what's behind it, hopefully, because there should be something behind the other. There should be something else working. And so there's so much at stake. And yet I've gotten into this place because I've been doing it for so long but if I think about it too much, I could probably panic, and I could think about all the regrets or the things I could have done better to prepare or something. But I feel like there's a lot of these peak moments, and they come from the last audition where I have to test in front of a room full of 30 execs that are all just kind of sitting there on a long table waiting for me to move them.
And that's 2 decades in. It's like
it doesn't change, and I go to talk to a group of high schoolers or go give a speech somewhere, and like people are like, how do you deal with nervousness? This peak. I'm like, I'm dealing with it right now. Like this is already pits. I get, nervous. This ride doesn't end, and thank God I still feel it viscerally, because if I was feeling a deadening of my senses with it, then where's the fun in that, And I feel like this family and this new found love of life, because I felt like, I always give the example when sometimes we talk about things like this, that I was on an airplane and we had really bad turbulence, and like literally some people like came up, almost hit the roof, and you had to lock in, and people were kind of freaking. Everyone started praying, and I was sitting there and I was calm, and I was like, well, I've had a great life, had a lot of like, you've been so fortunate in the things you've seen and done. Like I'd have to really sit back and look, because again, I always acted like I'd been voice there. But, we did it. And I don't feel that way now, in a good way. Like I feel a calmness, but the point is, I'm excited about everything. I'm excited. Everything's new with the kids. Everything's new with my wife and learning about me and intimacy.
Interesting. So the voice on the plane was partially healthy.
Partially healthy, partially someone who
we've done it all. There's
someone who kind of seen a lot of great things and didn't. And now I see it's all starting over again with the most basic things. with the most basic, beautiful emotions.
Is family a big
That's the root
part of
for
that,
it.
that catalyst to where, I heard someone say when their child was born, all things were new again. And I read this, an author had written that in a book, and I didn't read the rest of the book, but I remember reading that in the first page, and I was like, that's a really cool phrase. And it applies so deeply with our 3 children as well. It's, you go through childhood again with completely different lens.
And it's tough. And it's the most, you'll be flayed and you'll have to face so many things about yourself. But whatever, we can deal with that.
Nicholas, thank you so much for this generosity of insight, wisdom. I could ask you so many questions on that last topic. One of your interviews that I was listening to before this, you had said that you essentially signed up for a career of rejection. And from the outside looking in, even though I'm creator as well, I just think like, man, all of the amazing roles that you've played, the different shows that you've been on, like you said, the major leagues, just looks like all I see is the trophy case. That's all the world sees is the trophy case. So I could spend an hour talking to you about all of the losses, maybe in a winning season, but all of the really tough losses in just that phrase of a career of rejection. I think it's something that'll be for part 2.
There's a beauty there too, though. There's a beauty in all that struggle. There's a beauty in something you earn. There's a poetry in kind of the things that life keeps throwing at you, because as you well know, with your philosophy is, it's not what happens to you in life, but how we deal with it. And I constantly am trying to just say, okay, there's a world that I think exists of all this stuff and that I'm worried about, or these things, but that's not what's around me right now. Look where you're at right now. Look where you are. You're healthy. You're okay. It's all okay.
Kids will definitely help you think less about yourself.
Oh yeah, which was the most freeing thing. I was so tired of, Nicholas Gonzalez. It was so great to finally have something out of yourself to care so much more about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Nicholas, thank you so much, buddy. Until next time.
Awesome.
Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much.